The world of powerful entrepreneurs is a labyrinth of ambition and hidden secrets. But what if behind the spotlight of success lies a mind consumed by an unchecked ego? What drives someone to believe they can control everything, no matter the cost? This series will unveil a chilling truth that will forever change the way you see power and sanity in the business world. In the high-stakes world of business, where every move is scrutinized and every failure echoes louder than success, the story of the man known only as the Green Goblin begins. From the outside, he seemed destined for greatness, born into a family where power was legacy and ambition was currency. Yet, behind the polished image of wealth and influence, a far more complex and troubling origin story was unfolding, one that would later explain his relentless drive and fractured mind. As a child, he was no different from any other boy striving for his father's approval. But the approval he sought was elusive. His father, a towering figure both in stature and reputation, valued strength, control, and perfection above all else. Love was conditional, given only when expectations were met, and swiftly withdrawn when standards slipped. In such a household, the young boy learned early that vulnerability was weakness and that his worth depended on the recognition of a man who rarely expressed warmth. This created an invisible prison. Psychologists describe this as the birth of an inflated paternal ego, where the child internalizes the pressure to not only live up to, but surpass, a larger-than-life figure. The mind responds to this pressure by erecting defenses. An armor of control, a mask of superiority, and a hunger for dominance. Behind this mask, however, lay a fragile core, vulnerable to the slightest hint of failure or rejection. The business environment became the playground where this complex personality took shape. Every deal was a battle, every decision, a test of worth. His peers admired his brilliance, calling it genius. But those closer saw something darker. A man wrestling with shadows of doubt and a compulsion to prove himself endlessly. The need to control every aspect of his company was not merely strategic, it was a psychological necessity, a way to quiet the storm inside. His early ventures were marked by success, but also by an intensity that bordered on obsession. Late nights spent poring over contracts, relentless pressure on employees, and an inability to accept advice or failure became the norm. Science reveals that such behaviors often stem from an overactive amygdala, the brain center for emotional processing, combined with suppressed feelings of inadequacy. This cocktail fuels a relentless cycle. The more control he sought, the more his insecurities grew, hidden beneath layers of calculated charisma. Yet, even with all this turmoil, there was a charm to his madness. A magnetic energy that pulled people toward him, convinced they were witnessing the rise of a visionary. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Allies became wary, and whispers of instability began to surface in boardrooms. The Green Goblin's mind was a labyrinth, brilliant, yes, but twisted by the very forces that propelled him forward. And still, no one saw the storm gathering on the horizon. No one anticipated the fracture that would soon ripple through his empire, a fracture that would reveal the true cost of a legacy built on fragile egos and hidden fears. But there was something nobody saw coming. Inside his mind, the rupture was seismic. The confidence that once masked his insecurities gave way to an internal storm. Psychology explains this moment as a trigger for deep transformation, a confrontation with the self that can either lead to growth or unravel everything. The Green Goblin found himself at this crossroads, wrestling with a fear that had long been buried, the fear of insignificance, of being unmasked as flawed and vulnerable. Externally, the world began to shift against him. Competitors sensed weakness and encroached, while allies questioned his judgment. The media, once dazzled by his charm, now whispered of instability and erratic decisions. The pressure mounted, and with it, the cracks within his psyche widened. Conflict raged on two fronts, a battle with the external forces threatening his empire, and an even fiercer war within his own mind. The lines between reality and obsession blurred as he became consumed by a need not just to recover, but to dominate at any cost. This was no longer just about business, it was a fight for identity, for survival. Science offers insight into such transformations. Neuroscientific studies show that intense stress and trauma can rewire the brain's circuitry, heightening paranoia, aggression, and compulsive behaviors. The Green Goblin's actions became unpredictable, a dangerous blend of brilliance and volatility. Those close to him watched helplessly as his decisions grew more reckless, his vision increasingly distorted. The rupture had unleashed a new force, one that no one could control. His once orderly world spiraled into chaos, mirrored by the turmoil inside. And it was there, in that breaking point, that everything truly began to fall apart. The man known as the Green Goblin was no longer the ambitious entrepreneur that the world once admired. His mind had begun to twist, reshaping itself around fears and desires that were no longer hidden. What was once a fragile ego had hardened into a fortress of distorted logic and relentless ambition. Inside his head, the voices of doubt were drowned out by an ever-growing narrative, that his vision was not only right but necessary, a vision that justified any means to an end. To those outside, his actions seemed ruthless; to him, they were calculated moves in a grand design. Psychology labels this transformation as a shift into cognitive rigidity, where the brain locks onto a single belief system, rejecting any conflicting information. His conversations became veiled commands, laced with subtle threats and manipulations. Employees who once respected him now tread lightly, sensing the change but unsure how deep the darkness ran. Colleagues described meetings where he would speak in chilling calmness about sacrifices needed for the greater good, hinting at a mind that no longer wrestled with morality. Scientific studies of similar personalities reveal a complex interplay between heightened dopamine-driven reward circuits and impaired emotional regulation. This cocktail fosters an illusion of invincibility, a conviction that the individual is above conventional rules and ethics. The Green Goblin's confidence was no longer charming, it was unsettling. Imagine a chess player so focused on the endgame that every piece, every move, is part of a cold calculation. His world became a board where people were pawns to be sacrificed or pawns to be controlled. Yet, beneath this cold exterior, fragments of the old self occasionally surfaced, moments of doubt or flashes of regret quickly buried beneath layers of denial. But the most chilling fact was yet to emerge. This distorted mind was not the final form. Beneath the surface, a darker force still slumbered, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And the true monster was still asleep. There comes a moment in every story when the fragile boundaries between right and wrong begin to dissolve, until they vanish entirely. For the Green Goblin, this moment arrived not with thunder, but with a quiet finality that sealed his fate. The carefully maintained facade of control shattered, replaced by an unyielding conviction that his vision was beyond question, and that any sacrifice was justified in its name. The weight of his empire pressed down with relentless force. What had once been cautious steps to safeguard his legacy now turned into bold, irreversible actions. Every decision carried with it the shadow of consequences he was no longer willing to avoid. His moral compass, once only slightly askew, now pointed decisively toward a path few dared to tread. Ethics, empathy, and compassion were discarded as obstacles, weaknesses that hindered the realization of a higher purpose. To him, these were luxuries for the uninformed, distractions that prevented true progress. He saw himself as a visionary trapped in a world that clung stubbornly to outdated ideals, a man burdened with the duty to dismantle what no longer served the future. But this transformation was not just external, it was a total internal realignment. The Green Goblin's mind wove intricate justifications, rationalizing actions that even he might have once found disturbing. In his eyes, destruction was a form of creation, chaos was the crucible in which a new order could be forged. The boundaries of human decency blurred into shades of necessity, and his heart grew cold with resolve. Around him, allies and adversaries alike watched with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Friends became strangers, opponents became targets, and the world itself seemed to recoil from the intensity of his drive. Yet, through it all, he remained unwavering, convinced that the sacrifices demanded were not only inevitable but essential. Here lies the unsettling question that haunts this dark tale: what if he is right? What if the upheaval and devastation he brings are the painful but necessary steps toward a greater good? This paradox challenges everything we believe about morality and justice, forcing us to ask, could the line between hero and villain be thinner than we think? As the Green Goblin crossed the point of no return, his vision took on the weight of destiny. In his mind, the world was split into two camps, those who understood his purpose and those who stood in the way of progress. There was no room for compromise, no space for mercy. And so the final question lingers in the shadows: if he is the villain in this story, could he also be the only one capable of true change? A question that refuses to let us rest. Beneath the chaos and the calculated ruthlessness lies a chilling truth: the Green Goblin's actions were not the result of a fractured mind lost in madness, but the outcome of a cold, deliberate logic. To understand him fully, we must delve into the science of the shadows, the psychological and neurological mechanisms that shape behavior beneath the surface of consciousness. Studies in psychology reveal that certain personality traits, such as narcissism and obsessive-compulsiveness, when intensified by extreme pressure and trauma, can evolve into patterns of behavior that appear ruthless and unyielding. His relentless drive was fueled by a complex cocktail of dopamine-driven reward systems and cognitive biases, an internal mechanism that rewarded risk-taking and reinforced his distorted worldview. Neuroscience shows that the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and impulse control, can become compromised under intense stress, leading to impaired judgment and increased risk tolerance. Simultaneously, the amygdala, the brain's center for emotional processing, may amplify feelings of paranoia and threat, fueling defensive and aggressive behaviors. The Green Goblin's mind operated within this delicate imbalance, a neurological storm that both propelled and imprisoned him. Comparisons can be drawn to real-world figures who displayed similar psychological profiles, visionary leaders whose brilliance was shadowed by a relentless quest for control, individuals whose calculated decisions altered entire industries, yet left devastation in their wake. History is littered with such paradoxes, where genius and destructiveness walk hand in hand. What's striking about the Green Goblin is not just his capacity for destruction, but the clarity with which he executed his plans. His cold, methodical calculations revealed a mind that was not lost but hyper-focused, operating with a chilling logic that saw emotions as obstacles and efficiency as the ultimate goal. He was not merely reacting to chaos, he was orchestrating it. And this was not madness. This was cold calculation. When the dust finally settled, what remained was not just the aftermath of destruction, but the echo of a mind that had reshaped the world in its image. The Green Goblin's legacy was a paradox, a blend of innovation and ruin, a shadow cast long beyond his own story. His vision, though forged in darkness, changed the landscape around him in ways impossible to ignore. The world he left behind bore the marks of his passage. Fractured alliances, transformed industries, and a new order built on the ashes of the old. Some hailed him as a necessary force, a catalyst for progress that broke through complacency and stagnation. Others saw only the scars, the human cost of a man who pursued his goals at any price. Yet, the true legacy is not just in what he built or destroyed, but in the questions he left behind. Who are we to judge a mind so profoundly altered by ambition and trauma? Is the line between visionary and villain simply a matter of perspective? And perhaps most unsettling of all, was he truly the last of his kind? Philosophers argue that chaos is an eternal cycle, a force that both destroys and creates in endless rhythm. The Green Goblin may have been a singular figure, but the darkness he embodied remains, waiting in the shadows for the next mind to claim it. In the end, the myth lives on, not as a warning, but as a mirror. Reflecting our own fears, our own desires, and the fragile boundary that separates genius from madness. And maybe, just maybe, the story is far from over.